Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Iowa State Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson, back for another week of football and just general Iowa State discussion. Iowa State is still in the middle of spring practice, or kind of in the early part of that, I should say. But got a little bit to talk about there, and I really want to talk about just kind of some projection type stuff there. But we were going to talk about Dom Orange this week and his combine stuff, but he ended up not really doing much at the combine. He did his interviews, but otherwise is saving his testing times for a pro day. So we won't have a lot to talk about there as far as his day goes. But so we're going to talk a little bit about football, specifically the things that I want to hear as far as like rumors coming out of spring practice, like things that I want to hear. But then we're also going to talk a little bit of basketball too, I think, if we've got a little bit of time, depending on what the chat brings up and all that stuff too. So as usual, appreciate everybody that brings in comments and chat and questions and all that stuff. And happy to answer questions throughout the entire stream. Whatever you guys have for me. So first up, let's talk a little bit about the things that I want to hear coming out of spring practice. So these are just like, whether it's little nuggets or just, whether or news or nuggets or whatever, just the rumors that I want to hear, just to make me feel like the Jimmy Rogers era is off to a good start. And to feel like this thing is still pointed in the right direction, in that, because every spring, I think we hear different rumors come out, or we hear different little things like, oh, this guy is performing well, this group's doing well, whatever it is. And then, sometimes it's real, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just like hyping a dude up just to hype him up type of thing. There's now it was a fall practice thing and not a spring practice thing, but there's the infamous like Easton Dean might be the best tight end we've ever had come through here bit. And then that turned out to be extremely not true. But then we also heard like fall practice again, but when Breece Hall first got started here, we had heard that like Breece Hall was having like a ridiculous camp and that he might be the best running back to go through Iowa State. And that actually turned out to be basically true. So in fact, she wants to talk about gymnastics, which actually we could talk a little bit about gymnastics. I had set this video up before the gymnastics stuff kind of started blowing up a little bit. It was after the original announcement that the program was getting shut down, but it was before all the athletes started posting their stuff on Twitter and turning this into a little bit of a situation. I don't know if it, exactly what magnitude the situation is, but we can talk a little gymnastics as well. But we'll talk a little about football to start off with. So just a few things that I kind of want to hear, just because this is a Voice of College Football show. So I feel like we should at least talk a little bit of football. The first main thing that I want to hear out of practice is I want to hear that Jalen Raynor has started to set himself apart from the pack in terms of being the starter and being the senior leader. We've already heard a little bit about that, about him stepping in and learning guys' names and just being a generally a good teammate and stuff like that. We've heard a lot of that already, but I want to hear that like on the field, he has started to set himself apart. Like no offense to Connor Moberly whatsoever, but just like, I want to hear that Jalen Raynor has taken a firm hold of the starting quarterback position, in that, they wouldn't have brought him in if he wasn't like kind of sort of penciled in at least, or, at bare minimum had an upper hand in a QB battle. But I want the QB battle to be completely settled by the end of the spring. When you have a team like this that's full of a lot of new players, young players, to me, the last thing that you want to have going into your season when you have such a new team and new coaching staff and all this is that you don't want to have any sort of doubts at the QB position. And I think, generally speaking, I think pretty much everybody believes in Jalen Raynor's ability. He's obviously super athletic. He's a veteran guy that's played a lot of football, had a lot of success, played for some good Arkansas State teams, was coached by Butch Jones, who is a well-respected coach. I don't think anybody really questions his ability. It's more just can he step his game up to match a higher level of competition. He's just got Jalen Raynor just got the one left, so he's here for just this year. So that's why I think you're looking at he's almost certainly going to be the starter, but I want that to be settled this spring. I want there to be a clear delineation between him as the starter, Mobley as the backup, and then whoever at the third spot, Hudson Curland or whoever at the third spot. If you can have that solidified, you can have the most important position on your team solidified going into fall camp, going into the season. That gives you a place to build everything else around. If you know what your quarterback situation is going to be, you can build your offense around that. You can build your scheme. And I think you just you want to have that foundation to build everything else from. So I want to hear Jalen Raynor has been essentially, written in stone as the starter for this coming season. The next thing I want to hear, we're kind of moving through here though, is I want to hear about an offensive line group that is starting to gel a little bit. Now it's hard to do that without scrimmages and stuff like that. And that's you're going to hear more of that in fall practice, but I want to hear about guys like Masai King that they are living up to, that they're thus far, as advertised. You could talk about the running backs, I think, and there's like some worthwhile discussion to be had there, as far as Aiden Flora or Petaway. There's Bryson Williams. There's interesting discussion to be had about the running backs, but I think just based on the scheme, based on the quarterback, and based on how I think they're going to do this, I don't know if it necessarily matters a ton who the individual players are at running back, as long as they, if they're good enough to start, they're probably good enough to be successful in this scheme if everything else is going well. So I'm not as worried about the individuals to hear about out of the running back room. Like, I don't really care if it's Petaway or if it's Aiden Flora or if it's Bryson. I'm not really too worried about that either way. And obviously, River Peppers is going to be out for the next, he'll be out into October, I would imagine, because of his Achilles injury. Like my guess is he'll probably take another red shirt. He'll either have his red shirt or medical red shirt last season, and he'll grab a red shirt or medical red shirt this season as well, I would imagine. Or he'll come back late enough that he can only play in 4 regular season games or something like that. So I would imagine River Peppers will return in 2027 as a redshirt freshman, a third-year redshirt freshman. But the offensive line, I'd like to hear that they're starting to have some guys float to the top, Masai King and there's a few other guys, maybe Barrett or something like that. A couple other guys. I want to hear about a few guys that are starting to rise to the top a little bit, because I think if you can find your foundational pieces, Taylor would be another one. I think I'd like to hear him step up. Maybe Gavin Proudfoot. And about this PE dishing. All the Olympic sports for Iowa State are just going insane right now. I want to hear that. I want to hear that group. Next thing I want to hear is some more about the wide receiver position. So the wide receiver position specifically, it'd be nice to hear about guys like Amari Hayes and stuff like that. What I'm actually more interested, the one I'm almost most interested in, because I think the other guys will be good. I want to hear, there's a couple different guys. But I want to hear about the development of no, you're good. Sorry. Yeah. You kind of blew my train of thought there. But I wanted to hear about the receiver whose name has completely escaped me. Coming back from last year. God damn it. I just completely left my brain. Fuck. What's his name? The hell am I thinking of? Dominic Overby. There we go. I want to hear about Dominic Overby, because last year, obviously, he started hot, caught that touchdown pass in the Kansas State game, And he's a big time athlete. He's a big time athlete that last year we thought he would be able to step up and become kind of that maybe the X receiver for Iowa State, and his hands didn't catch up to his athleticism. He just never put it together consistently. And I think it's at 6'5", and with his athleticism, the foundation is clearly there. There's the blueprint is clearly there for a high end number one receiver right there. I want to see if this offseason he'll have a new receivers coach and have a new system and all this, a new quarterback. And maybe that's the refresh that Dominic Overby needed to be able to develop and to hit that next step in his growth, where he can be a reliable pass catching target. I mean, we knew coming out of high school that he was going to be fairly raw, because he was basically coming out of high school just an athlete, essentially. Very much in the same neighborhood as like Hakeem Butler was, where he's a really good athlete, just raw, not super refined necessarily as a route runner or as a contested catcher. Well, maybe contested catcher isn't the right word, because Hakeem Butler was very good at that. But as far as like an every down pass catcher, and having reliable hands, not dropping passes, things like that. But obviously Hakeem developed into a good deep route runner and a good contested catch guy. Even if he never really firmed up his game like in the underneath game and becoming like a really, really consistent, no drops guy, but obviously developed into a very good player. I think Dominic Overby has the athleticism to do something similar. He's not quite built quite as thick as Hakeem Butler is, so he's not gonna be able to just completely out physical guys the way Hakeem could, but he can absolutely be that kind of a deep threat for Iowa State as long as he can put the hands together. So this is actually a great point here. If Overby is a catch machine this year, there'll be some statements made about our previous wide receiver coach, Noah Paul, and that you're talking about Noah Pauley, who actually was at Penn State for like a month, and then he went to the NFL, I want to say, Noah Pauley, or to another program. I can't remember now, but Noah Pauley is now not even at Penn State. He went to the Packers. He's the wide receiver coach of the Packers because he linked up with Christian Watson there, who he coached at North Dakota State. It was either on this channel or on the Nightcap last year. There was multiple times that I was at least skeptical, I would say, of Noah Pauley, because his claim to fame was Christian Watson, who came out as a big time athlete that was unpolished and had some drop issues. That was Noah Pauley's guy. That was his claim to fame. That's what got him the job at Iowa State, basically, is Christian Watson. At Iowa State, they had a couple guys develop. I see Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, very good receivers. Jalen got much better after having some early drops. Was that just natural progression, or was that Noah Pauley that fixed that? I'm not sure. And I believe that Jaden Higgins was just good to begin with. Like, I don't think Noah Pauley was instrumental in Jaden Higgins being good. I think that's just kind of like how Jaden Higgins is. I think he's just a good receiver. I don't think Noah Pauley changed his trajectory a lot. And Jaden if you ask Jaden in person, he'd probably tell you that Noah Pauley was a huge, instrumental thing, but that's just kind of what guys do. We're going to find out though, because this year the drops were out of control. And if it's one guy, you can say, okay, this guy has lost confidence. He's lost concentration, whatever it is. You can write it off as just like it's one or two guys. It was the whole wide receiver room last year. Everyone except Eli Green, which is interesting that he just didn't play very much. But and especially because he was a North Dakota State guy, so it was very, very odd that Eli Green, who was the only consistent pass catcher on the entire team, was the one that just didn't play very much. But either way, when it's an entire position group that is just not able to do the primary function of their job, I think you have to look at the position coach and how good of a job they were doing. If your wide receivers can't consistently catch the football, then the wide receiver coach is not doing his job, because it is his job to make sure that his wide receivers can catch the football. Now, whether that's he's doing everything he can to teach them and they're just not picking it up, and then that means it's kind of almost a recruiting issue and you're not recruiting coachable players, or you have good enough players that can make that adjustment, which if you're a Division I receiver, you are good enough to be a good pass catcher, which to me points to the fact that Noah Pauley just wasn't doing a very good job last season. And that could be it for a number of factors, but that's just kind of what it is. You have a new wide receivers coach now that I think will get, you'll give Dominic Overby a fresh look at his development. He can change things because he's got just a new set of eyes on his game that can watch and say, hey, this kid is really good. He can develop into a really nice player, and they can maybe get through to him in a way that Noah Pauley and the previous staff just couldn't do it. So I'm excited to hear about Dominic Overby. I want to hear if we can see that growth being made. Like I said, I think Omari Hayes, Cody Jackson, I think Carson Robbins, these guys, I feel like they're gonna be good. Carson Robbins is a random name to throw in there because he hasn't played much, but especially Omari Hayes, Cody Jackson, Evan Boyd, Carter Pabst, these guys that we expect to be heavy snap count guys. I expect them to be in the rotation. I'm not super worried about that. I'm not necessarily. I wouldn't say I'm worried about Dominic Overby so much as I'm very curious about what his growth, because his ceiling is incredibly high. His ceiling is an NFL receiver, but he's got to get it put together. He's got all the athleticism in the world. He's just got to get it put together and get to be a little bit better route runner. So he's not just a go ball guy, and he needs to be a consistent pass catcher in the short and intermediate stuff too. But if we go to the defensive side of the ball, well, I mean, first of all, I would like to hear some names emerge from camp in terms of cornerback. Safety, I'm not particularly worried about. I think you've got guys back there. I mean, obviously led by Braden Alls, but you've got Drew Surges back there, which I know at times Drew Surges is somewhat limited as a football player. He's got a fairly high floor, but he's also got but his ceiling isn't incredibly high, just because he's a solid athlete, but not a dominant athlete or anything like that. So I think, but he's a guy you can plug back there and just feel fine about him starting. Like, you're not worried necessarily. Like, you're okay with him starting there. And obviously you got Braden Alls back there. But you bring in like a Malcolm Jones or Michael Harper or something like that. Like, you got guys that you brought in that I think are really interesting. But safety, I'm not as concerned about, just because I think you've got so many names there. But corner is a spot that I really want to hear. I really want to hear about some guys at corner, because that you lost quite a bit there, and you're pretty much bringing in a whole new group here. I'm not sure. The only real returner there is Benny Nagoye, David Coffey, I suppose. Right now, is David Coffey penciled in as a starter? Probably. He started a bunch of games last year, played pretty solid football. Bringing him back, but you bring in like a Tyrone Cotton, or you've got Benny. Then you've got Benny Nagoye there, who obviously his ceiling physically is Darian Porter. He can be Darian Porter. They just got to do it. They got to turn him into that. But he's got all the athleticism in the world. He's 6'4", so he's very tall for a corner. Is it Keon Washington that's going to be there? Is it Seth Johnson? Is it Jaheim Singletary? The Arkansas transfer. Is it Tyrone Cotton? Is it Trillian Sorrell? There's a lot of guys in this room, and right now David Coffey is the only one I would look at and be like, okay, I think this guy is going to step up and be one of the starters, but I don't know that for sure, because he wasn't really supposed to play last year. I mean, he was the fourth string guy last year. He wasn't supposed to play a lot. The injuries forced him onto the field, and when he was on the field, he was pretty solid. But is he ready to? Are we ready to say he's a Big 12 starter and he can be the leader of this team, or he can be not the leader of the team, but he be the leader of this group in the secondary? I don't know. You do bring back some more experienced guys. David Coffey is a redshirt sophomore, but you brought in a few upperclassmen too. So, we'll see how that all shakes out. But I'm interested to see. I'm interested to see how that goes. The other thing here, another spot I'm very interested in. Dukester says, "Am I the only one who thinks Nagoya would be better suited as a safety, more like a nickel corner? I don't disagree with that. I think you could put. I think it kind of depends because safeties. I think you could probably fit him either place. Nickel corner, he's probably too big as a nickel corner. I think if you were going to put it, if you're going to move him away from corner, because you'd want to keep him as a boundary or a field corner. I don't think you would keep him as a nickel. But if you were to move him to safety, I think you would want him to be more of a free safety where he can be a little bit more rangy and not be the safety in charge of coming down, being the first safety down to deal with the run. I think you'd want him to allow him to be more of a coverage specialist, deep safety where he can really use his size and speed to go pick off some deep balls. I think that's where I would prefer to keep Ben Nagoya, which is why I think I'd prefer him as a boundary or a field corner. For anyone that's not familiar with the boundary and field terminology, you don't actually really see in the NFL because the hashes are so close together and the field is fairly symmetrical for the most part. In college, because the hashes are so wide, it creates really imbalanced. The wide side of the field in college is much, much wider than it is in the NFL. So in college, they use boundary safety and they use field safety. Boundary is basically the corner on the outside on the short side of the field. Field safety is the wide corner on the wide side of the field. So they're going to be asked to do different things. Field corner is going to probably generally be, it's going to be more of a zone assignment. You want a corner that's better at sitting in zone. Boundary corners are going to be more of a man-to-man type coverage because they're typically going to be on your best. They're probably going to be on the best receiver a lot, but it just kind of depends. But that's the distinction between boundary and field. Is you're talking about a perimeter cornerback. Just depending on in the field and boundary just defines which side of the wide side or the near side of the field. So I think you would want him in those spots where he can use his speed in space versus I think a nickel. I think his size would work against him a little bit as a nickel because nickels really need to be shifty side to side because they're covering slot receivers that are running lots and lots of underneath routes. And Ben Nagoya's size and speed are better used when he can open his hips a little bit and he can really start to run a little bit for longer distances and let his stride length really and his long speed take over versus making him work in short space. And that's why we saw that with Darian Porter as well, is that they were typically putting him on the go ball guy because on a go ball situation, Darian Porter was fast enough to keep up with the streak receiver, and he was tall enough to go pick something off. They didn't typically ask him to take assignments underneath because that was going to limit the impact of his size and his long speed. So I think you think of Ben Nagoya the same way, where you want to give him as many opportunities as he can to use his long speed. Because that's where his is where he's gonna be. Oh, so he said, who would you have played that position then the nickel correspondent? So out of the current group stuff, I haven't gotten to watch a lot of these guys on tape so far. Just going off of size, you're typically going to put your smaller guys there. I mean, the interesting thing is actually, I would say it is fairly tall at corner. They have only got one guy under 6 foot. You've got 6'1", 6'4", 6'2", 6'1", 6'1", 6'1", 6'2", 6'1". Or sorry, they got two. Eddie Lamos is 5'10" as well. So they've only got two guys under 6 foot. So no matter what, I would say it's going to have a little bit taller nickel corner, but I don't think you would want to put Nagoya there. Maybe you put maybe, I don't know, maybe you put David Coffey as a nickel corner and let him do his thing, and then you stick Ben Nagoya on the outside in one spot, and then find your best, find your other best corner and stick him on the outside on the other side. You got lots of options there, so we'll just kind of see what they come up with. It's a fairly young room though. Redshirt sophomore. Ben Nagoya is a redshirt junior. Jaheim Singletary is a redshirt senior. Then you've got redshirt sophomore, redshirt freshman, true freshman, redshirt sophomore. And then A. Lemos is a redshirt senior. They've only got 2 upperclassmen. Everybody else is an underclassman. So it's a young group that can grow, and we will see how that whole thing shakes out. The defensive line is interesting, but I think there's probably a clear top line in this group though. You're looking at Zamir Hawk is probably Zamir Hawk and Bobby Terrell feel like no doubt pencil them in starters for the 2 defensive tackle spots. Maybe you keep an eye out for what the defensive end battle looks like. Jack Limbaugh, Jace Gilbert, Trey Verdon. I think there's a lot of interesting names in there for sure. But I think you've got a fairly solidified 2 deep on the defensive line. So I think we're actually really where my interest lies is at linebacker, and it's because I do believe linebacker is probably the deepest position group on the team right now. And for that reason, if you're playing a 4-2-5, you're only putting 2 of them out there, maybe on certain certain situations, you stick a third one out there as a stand-up edge rusher. But you've got some names here. I mean, Sullivan Schlimgen is coming from Washington State. I think a lot of people are very high on him. He's a true sophomore. The guy I'm very high on that I'm really excited to watch is Tristan Exline, the D2 transfer. But he was, he may be coming from D2, but he's his offer list coming out of transferring into the FBS was very, very impressive. Watching his tape, very, very impressed with Tristan Exline. I don't know if he's the starter. I kind of think he'll be at least in the 2 deep. I'd be blown away if he isn't in the 2 deep. And right now I would kind of think he would be a starter just based on his familiarity with the scheme and just the style of ball he plays. But you got Carson Willett, who's been around forever. Obviously learning a new scheme, so we'll see how quickly he picks up the scheme. But obviously he's a veteran presence there. Ethan Stecker is a guy that they're bringing over. I think that I know they're really excited about. Bo Goodwin. It seems like he actually a 4-2-5 linebacker might be a good spot for him. Because I think you could have easily when he came into school, I would say decided he's gonna be a linebacker / maybe an edge rusher, and they bulked him up a little bit, but I think if you wanted to, I think they could have gone the other direction. I think you could have slimmed him down a touch and moved. I think you could have moved Bo Goodwin back to almost a free safety type role, kind of being a Bo Freeler, basically. I think you could have done that with Bo Goodwin as well. So a 4-2-5 linebacker where you need to be rangy could be a good fit for Bo Goodwin. I really think that. Duke says Blake Hawkins could be sneaky good for Iowa State this year. His production is really good at Iowa West. Yeah, Blake Hawkins absolutely is a name there as well. I think they've got lots of names. So I'm just very curious to see how many of these shake out. Like, even behind all these guys, you've got Rylan Barnes, who played it. Obviously didn't play a lot last year, but the year before that played a ton. I don't know what his expectations are. I mean, because he was, he's a scholarship guy now, but he was a walk-on. I don't know what his expectations are, but he's played a decent amount of Big 12 football too. So is he a guy that finds a way onto the 2 deep or into some sort of rotation there? Because obviously there's only a couple spots available for you at the linebacker spot. What I do want to point out here, though, I'll pull up the roster here because I want to show you. We talked a little bit about this last week when we were talking about recruiting. But hold on a second here. Okay, so when we talked about recruiting last week, I kind of brought it up because this was, that's kind of, we could see kind of their new patterns as far as who they're recruiting, where they're getting them from, stuff like that. But I want to show you the linebackers just so we can see really what, like, you, you can look at the linebackers and see, get a good idea of just kind of like the philosophy change and the kind of types of bodies they keep in the room. Sullivan Schlimgen, 220. Tristan Exline, 215. Carson Willich, 225. Willie Breland, 200 flat. Ethan Stecker, 210. Montrez Smith, 204. Bo Goodwin, 230. And he's, and Rylan Barnes, 235. And Landon Carlsbad, 215. The two linebackers they brought back, Bo Goodwin and Rylan Barnes, are actually the three linebackers they brought back are the biggest ones in the room by 10 pounds. Carson Willich, you could say he fits in there, slots in there fairly nicely, 225. He's a little bit bigger than like Exline and Schlemgen, but Bo Goodwin and Rylan Barnes are the only guys breaking 230. I would be a little bit surprised almost if you don't see those weights come down a little bit, because in a 4.25, your linebackers need to be mobile. They need to be quick. They need to be able to get to the sideline. They need to get sideline to sideline. They need to be able to move. Versus like in a 3.35 where you need them to be a little bit sturdier, where they can sit in gaps and they can tango with defensive, where they can mess around a little bit and hold their own against, guards and tackles and stuff like that. You're not really going to be expected to do that as much in a 4.25, but you are going to be expected to be able to cover ground to get to the edge on runs and things like that to help set the edge. So I would expect to see Rylan Barnes slim down to 225 or 230. And I'd, probably, maybe Bo Goodwin drops another 5 pounds or something like that to just slim down a little bit and to get a little bit quicker. So you can clearly see, though, they're going, the linebackers are smaller than they have been. A lot of times you saw, I think Mike Rose played around 245, trying to think. Well, actually, we can find this out. Let's go back to like 2022. So if we go back to 2022 and look back, even Bo Freeler with 212 seems low for what he was. He looked a lot bigger than 212, but there's freaking Eddie Lamos on that team. Look at that right there as a true freshman. Let's go to our linebackers. Colby Reeder, 242. Miles Mendezun, just as a redshirt freshman, though, 220. Jacob Inman, 222. Carson Willits, just a baby at 214. He's picked up 10 pounds since then. But Cole Peterson, 240. Gary Vaughn, 231. Orion Vance, 260. You had some, Hunter Zinzen, 245. You had some big boys in there. And Kendall Jackson, 230. Caleb Bacon, 230. You had some big guys playing linebacker for Iowa State, comparatively speaking. So we can see that they've started slimming this down, and it's just interesting to see how these guys, their bodies are morphing to fit the new scheme, and it's very interesting to watch. TCU used to run their linebacker small a couple years ago. Honestly, it was pretty tough. Those dudes actually do fly around the field. Yeah, they actually do around the field by crazy. Yeah, the 4.25. I don't know if he was the first one to do it, but it was made famous by Gary Patterson at TCU. And they were always, that was their bid, is that their team speed was crazy. They had tons and tons and tons of team speed. So, it makes sense to me that Iowa State's slimming down at linebacker. They kept speed on defense. They kept, they kept Benny Nagoya. They kept David Coffey. They kept these speed guys that are going to fit this system really well. They kept Carson Willich, who moves pretty well. They kept Bo Goodwin, who, like I said, had the last staff decided to move him back instead of up, I think he could have done that. I think he's athletic enough to do that. Is the mind there to play safety? I don't know, but body and athleticism wise, Bo Goodwin could have just slimmed down a touch and played safety. He's athletic enough to do that. So you keep him around, and Rylan Barnes moves fairly well for a linebacker too. And especially Will, if you can slim him down and not make him carry around so much weight. So, that's probably, maybe that's just another thing that I'll be looking for out of spring ball, is to see if there are, what kind of weight changes we see, because I would assume that they'll have a post spring roster update on the website, or a post spring depth chart maybe. Um, which means that they may update heights and weights and all that too. So if they do, I'll be very curious to see what comes out of that. Even if it's just we don't get the update till August. I'll be curious to see how that shakes out. So that's what I want to hear out of spring football. Those are the kind of the nuggets I'd like to hear. I mean, obviously, it'd be cool to hear, oh man, Aiden Flores is going to win the Doak Walker, sure. That'd be great to hear. But as far as the things like I need to hear as far as a baseline thing, just to feel like things are moving in the right direction. That's what I hear. I'll tell you what, one of the things I don't care about hearing is, every spring and fall, you always hear about like, oh, the defense is playing well. The defense is dominating, or the offense is dominating. The offense is moving the ball at will, or the defense is just causing all sorts of problems for the offense. A lot of times that doesn't mean anything. If the defense, one, it probably changes day by day. And then two, if your defense is dominating your offense, is that because your defense is good, or is it because the offense is bad? If the offense is moving the ball at will, is it because your offense is unstoppable, or is it because the defense is bad? So the type of stuff is like that kind of thing, is like which unit's better than the other. I don't care about that as much, because it's all relative. The only metrics they have, the only vibe checks that they've got on either of these units are just playing against each other. So they don't really know what they've got yet, and they won't until fall camp. And really, we won't until the season starts. So I don't really care about that kind of stuff. But I am interested in more of the individual player development, and maybe individual position groups from there. Okay, let's talk a little bit about. I was going to talk about basketball, but I have seen plenty of requests for other stuff. Oh, we got a question here. If you were the OC, how many times do you think percentage-wise? If you were the OC, how many times do you think percentage-wise? I might need you to clarify that question a little bit. We can talk a little bit about gymnastics today, right now, though, because this has been a story that has developed within the day today that is quite interesting, to say the least. And so for anybody that somehow has not heard, obviously, I would say just this morning, Jamie Pollard announced that they were shutting down the gymnastics program, which he had. Oh, we got to clarify a question before we get into gymnastics. If you're the offensive coordinator, how often would you let Jalen Rayner? How many carries would you give him? How often would you let him run? Great question. As far as design runs, a handful a game maybe, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm letting Jalen Rayner use his legs as often as he wants to. I'm not putting any sort of limit on him. This is his last year playing college football. As long as I think he's smart enough to keep himself healthy, I don't see any reason to put any sort of limitations on him as far as how he wants to use his legs, especially in the first year. An offensive line that's going to take time to gel. You let Jalen Rayner do Jalen Rayner things. Let him do anything. Let him do what he wants as far as, taking off and running. Obviously, you want him to throw the football and stay in the pocket and deliver the ball. And actually, I don't even care if he's in the pocket. You want him to throw the football. But if he's got an opportunity to pick up 15 yards, mostly untouched with his legs, go. That's fine. Keep the offense moving, keep the ball moving, keep the chains moving. I'm good with that. I don't feel like you need to put a pitch count on Jalen Rayner at this point in his career. Not the way that you would have Brock Purdy when he was a sophomore, where you need to keep him healthy for a few more years. So, you don't want him just taking tons and tons of shots. But all right. So gymnastics, like I said, earlier today, Jamie Pollard announced that they were shutting down the gymnastics program, which I think had been kind of speculated by a lot of people for the last couple of weeks after really since the day that they announced, that they were going to cancel the rest of the season. After they had a meet in Denver. And then right after that, they announced that they were canceling the rest of the season. And since then, that day Jamie Pollard had said, like, we decided we can't field the team and all this, whatever. Was very vague about reasons. And then I think a lot of people from there, just kind of based on the wording of the letter, kind of speculated that they would just kind of shut the gymnastics program down because there was just not a lot going on. And apparently there was lots of problems. That came to fruition today. And Jimmy Pollard put out a video that he spent the first half of it. It was a weird video. And it was a weird video to listen to because sorry, here, just give me 1 second here. I'm updating the show title to capture this. So people aren't confused. Anyway, so the video was a little weird to watch because it started out, the first half of it or so was Jamie Pollard saying, like, it's usually fun to be the athletic director. I've for the most part, I've had lots of fun. I've enjoyed this on all this. And basically spent the first kind of like a 3-minute video. He spent the first minute and a half of it just telling people how sometimes his job sucks, which great, Jamie. You're the only person in the world that has a job that sucks sometimes. We all feel very bad for you. And he said, well, but today's one of those days that my job sucks. And, he said, well, we're deciding to discontinue the gymnastics program. And he kind of went down a laundry list of things where he cited issues that came up. I think it was in 2018 and then they brought in, they talked to the school's, athletics council, the lawyers, and had them kind of review things, what was going on. He was very, very vague about very vague about all of this. That he brought in the school's council to do a study just to kind of, I guess, to evaluate the health of the program or something like that, because there was some issues that were interpersonal issues or something that were coming up. And they made changes based on the recommendations from the in-house council. And then a few years ago, some other things happened. They brought in outside counsel who then conducted a study and found a bunch of things that apparently were never resolved or continued to get worse or something. Again, I realize I'm being very vague about this, and that is only because Jamie Pollard gave us little to no explanation about, like, as far as specifics about what happened. And then, that was kind of the whole video basically. And then said, like, well, for this, we felt that it was the right decision for Iowa State to just shut the gymnastics program down. And then that they were going to explore a new women's sport that offered, equal or greater opportunity for women's athletes. And they said that they hadn't looked into that just yet. Everybody is publicly speculating that it will be women's wrestling because Iowa is one of the few states that has girls high school wrestling. It's immensely popular. So you've got tons of in-state recruiting that you can do. You have a lot of talent in-state that you can pull from. You'll have tons of support. It's wrestling. It's wrestling in Iowa. It's going to do well. You've already got some facilities. You can convert the old gymnastics facility into a new wrestling room for the women's team. It's not a massive startup cost. I think women's wrestling just makes a ton of sense. I've seen flag football floated out there, which I think would be very interesting. I would love to cover, this Voice of College Football channel would cover 2 football teams, which would be really cool. I would be very enthusiastic about covering women's flag football. But that one comes with some other logistical issues because I believe Nebraska is starting a program, but otherwise the nearest flag football programs, I believe, are Colorado and Purdue Fort Wayne or Indiana Fort Wayne. I think it's Purdue Fort Wayne. So they just don't have a lot of opponents nearby to play in women's flag football. So we will, we'll see how that comes out. Like I said, I might get my money's on women's wrestling, and I think it just makes too much sense. Beyond that, though, What happened, what has transpired since then though, is a number of former athletes and coaches um posting on social media all day, basically refuting or adding context to everything that Jamie had been saying. Let me pull this up here. I can pull up a couple of these here, a couple posts from former Cyclone athletes. Let me pull this up. So, oh, here we go. There we go. There we go. Okay, so this one's from Haley Young, who I believe was a gymnast at Iowa State. She says, "Heartbroken. This video is BS. Unreconcilable differences. Give me a break. Hold yourself accountable. Hold your leadership accountable. Hold yourself accountable. The statement is a joke. Unbelievable." Um, have another here, Samantha Schneider, who I believe was another gymnast at Iowa State. I will apologize. I'm not I'm not super familiar with the now former gymnastics program. Um, Heart is broken. Forever love these girls and every memory that has been made and tear that has been put into this year. Terrible that this is the result of the lack of support from Iowa State's athletic administration. For the last 5 months, we have come forward as a team regarding certain situations and environmental concerns. Nothing has been done to protect us as athletes on this team. The gymnast should not be blamed or be sharing any part of responsibility for this decision being made. Bigger and better things ahead for every girl in this program. And I think where this one really started kind of taking a turn. I mean, the athletes chairman is obviously valuable. Ryan Snyder was an assistant on the team this year. He says, "Sad day for the sport. Shame on that entire ISU athletic department. All you had to do was take accountability for hiring the wrong person," which he's referring to the head coach, who her background was like she was not a coach before. She was a former college gymnast who then worked in auto finance for a while, or like a used car dealership or something like that, but just was like involved in the sport. And I think she was a gymnastics commentator for a little bit. And then we hired her without any coaching experience, basically. He said, "How many athletes, coaches, and parents went to administration and told you about Ashley? You have issues in every sport. It's college athletics. You're dealing with young humans in the most influential part of their lives. The issue recently with gymnastics, you hired a used car salesman to lead a storied Division I program. In what other sport or professional does hiring someone with zero experience make sense?" Um, I don't know the validity of all this stuff, but it seems to me everybody that was involved with the program has a different story to tell than what Jamie Pollard gave to us in his video today. Um, Anybody that has seen me on anything else on any previous streams, and you guys are probably aware, I am no fan of Jamie Pollard. I have been very critical of him in the past. I'm not going to use today as an opportunity to light into Jamie, because partially because it seems like one or both parties are not telling the full side, are not telling the full story here. I don't believe Jamie. I mean, Jamie's obviously not telling the full story, because he cited you could interpret what he said as essentially throwing everybody else in the program under the bus and shifting all blame to them. But I'm just curious. I'm not like saying that they're not telling the truth, but I'm curious to hear what the full story is from the gymnasts and the assistant coach's point of view, because they are painting a different picture. They're painting a picture of a lack of support, lack of institutional support for the program, in terms of like bad facilities and not listening to requests for improvements, things like that. And it is clear to me that neither side is telling the whole truth, or they're not. Whether it's because they can't for legal reasons, I guess, I don't know. But I don't know if we're ever going to get the full story out of all this, unless it like actually gets for some reason taken to court for, I don't know what anyone would sue for, but unless this for some reason gets, ends up in a courtroom where they have to use discovery, and then they have to, subpoena phone calls and text messages and emails and all this, we probably won't ever get the full story. But Um, it's not a good situation. It's a bad look. At minimum, it's a bad look for Jamie Pollard. Even if what he says is, mostly the truth, and that this was basically it coming down to this was just it coming down to like too much infighting and too many inter program conflicts that can't be resolved, that it's not worth the hassle anymore. The question I have then, because he said that the first problems arose in 2018. 2018 would have had a different coaching staff and a completely different roster. So why were there problems that happened in 2018 and problems that happened in 2023? Why were they both cited as reasons to shut down the program, 8 years after the original issues came up? I'm not saying something didn't happen in 2023 when when the outside counsel was brought in and that didn't cause problems. I'm sure it did. And that may have just been the straw that broke the camel's back. But he was citing two different situations that happened with two completely different groups of people. And the only common denominator in that situation is Jamie Pollard slash his staff that helps oversee the gymnastics program. So I'm curious as to why that was not addressed. The timeline doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense for him to essentially lay blame at the feet of everybody in the gymnastics program when the gymnastics program was an entirely different group of people the first time these issues came up. And those weren't the first issues. People may forget back when Jamie Pollard first started, then coach KJ Kindler, I believe is their last name, who was a very, very good gymnast at Iowa State, was building the program up to, real like legit national relevance. Came to athletics asking for investment into facilities and things like that to help keep up with times and to help modernize Iowa State's gymnastics facilities. And that was denied. Very much the same way that Cale Sanderson was not given money to, expand his wrestling program. And much like Cale Sanderson, KJ Kindler left for Oklahoma. If you know anything about collegiate gymnastics, Oklahoma is a blue blood in that sport. And it is because of KJ Kindler, who has won 7 national titles at Oklahoma as their head coach. So between gymnastics and wrestling, Iowa State has let go over a dozen national titles in 2 Olympic sports. And so when Jamie Pollard took over, the Iowa State gymnastics program was in a pretty good spot. They were nationally, pretty much they were a nationally relevant program. But in the course of Jamie Pollard's tenure, it went from a nationally relevant program to it is now literally dead. There's nothing left. And then today, the press release the release that the university put out to the fans today was that they are reimagining the women's sports lineup. Reimagining is a crazy word to use for we are cutting an entire program. This isn't we're going to shuffle things around because we just think this is the savvy thing to do. No, you blew up a gymnastics program because shit got bad. And apparently it seems like it was a failure at the feet of a lot of people to make this thing happen. But right now, Jamie Pollard has decided to lay all of the blame at the feet of the student athletes, the coaches, and the parents. So I'm not really sure what, like I said, I'm not sure what happened in 2023. I'm not sure what happened in 2018. But what I do know is that the gymnastics program has been on a slow decline for 2 decades now. And it has all happened under the watch of Jamie Pollard. I'm not saying it's all his fault, but it's not. Let's see. So Jamie Pollard took over in 2005. In 2004, Iowa State finished 14-4. And I believe they finished, they had 3 individual competitors at the NCAA championships. 2003 was a losing season, but then you go 2002, they were 14-9 and had some individual competitors. They did fairly well at the Big 12 championships. They were a decent program. Now you fast forward to 2025, they were 8-16. This year they were 2-11 before the season was canceled. 2024 they were 10-18. 2023 they were 8-10. 2022 they were 10-13. 2021 they were 10-8. That was the last winning season for Iowa State women's gymnastics. Shit got bad, and it happened under Jamie's watch because he apparently made multiple bad hires, and he is not taking any responsibility for that. And like I said, I don't know what happened in the last two incidents that he talked about, that he cited. But what I do know is that there's more responsibility for Jamie Pollard to take on this than he is currently taking. I mean, he's taking 0 right now. He has laid all of the blame at the feet of everybody else, and not taking any for himself for making what is apparently a horrific hire for the women's gymnastics coach, and for letting this happen twice under 2 different coaches and under 2 different rosters. I hope we hear more about this. I hope we get more clarity about things that happened. My guess is that in order for there to be true clarity on this, for people to actually be able to get like a half decent story about what happened, my guess is that the athletes would have to admit to doing things that they would have to admit to things that they would not otherwise be like publicly proud of necessarily. I truly am just speculating here. Like, the athletes, I think, would have been more specific about what happened if it was like something that they thought would make them only look good. And Jamie Pollard is partially choosing not to be specific because that's just kind of not what athletic directors do, I guess. He's a public figure, and they just didn't, his video today he put was very media trained. He's not going to be, Jamie Pollard is only going to give you the brass tacks when it benefits him and when it makes him look good, unfortunately. So I don't think we're going to get a full story about this, but I don't know. It's a frustrating situation. It sucks to see them cut a program. By nature, I'm a person that I find change interesting. Like I'm not a person that is naturally scared of change. I find change and taking on new projects to be very, very interesting. So like I'm immediately tuned into what are they going to add? What's the thought process behind choosing what they're going to add and all that? And, getting excited about a new sport. We haven't seen a new sport at Iowa State in a very, very long time. So, it's interesting to see. But it still sucks that you have a whole bunch of gymnasts that, they signed up to be here. A lot of them moved from other places in the country. They put their effort into wearing an Iowa State uniform, and Iowa State, singlet, leotard, whatever they called them. And it just didn't work out, and that sucks. But hey, it kind of is what it is. Time moves on. I think the people involved with the program now are going to they're going to feel bitter about it for a while. And I know in the video Jamie Pollard brought up, the baseball program, the women, the diving program, and all this. They brought up and said like initially there was pain, but they eventually moved on. None of those sports were cut by Jamie Pollard. So like if they had beef, the baseball team could take issue with Bruce Vandeveld because he was the one that cut the baseball program, or the Gene Smith was the one that would have cut diving, I think maybe. those players, like the baseball players, know that their sport was purely a casualty of Title IX. Like they know that it wasn't because there was like it was a dysfunctional program or anything like that. Like it wasn't any of that. It was purely because of for budgetary reasons due to Title IX compliance. They know that. So they know that it wasn't really Iowa State's decision. Like Iowa State didn't want to cut baseball. Like they weren't like, ah shit, this program is not a national competitor. We should cut baseball. They weren't looking to do that. They just kind of had to do that because of Title IX. This I don't think is going to pan out the same way. Gymnastics didn't need to be cut to fulfill any sort of budgetary or regulatory requirement. It was done because the program was dysfunctional, and now the people that were involved with that program believe they were slighted. I would not, if Jamie Pollard said, like, I hope in time that they can learn and they can come back and be proud of, and reestablish connection with the university and all this, whatever. Based on what I'm seeing today, I would not bet on it. I would not put a lot of money on many of the athletes or coaches that were involved in the program this year. I would not expect many of them to retain a positive relationship with the university. I don't think they're going to come back and be like, I don't think they'll be proud to come back and come to a football game or something like that and you'll be honored at a football game. Like, I don't like if they brought back the 2017 gymnastics team for whatever reason, I don't know that you're going to get a lot of people that want to come back for that. Now, those, the people on that team didn't get screwed by this, but they probably know the people that did. And right now, pretty much everybody involved with the gymnastics program feels very harsh resentment towards specifically Jamie Pollard and the athletic department. I don't know about the university, but specifically, they feel major resentment right now, and they're pissed. I don't blame them. So I think Jamie's idea that eventually in time, these, the gymnasts and the coaching staff from this team will, they'll move on and they'll eventually have a positive relationship with the university. I think that's a pipe dream. And I honestly would not blame them one bit for holding resentment for a long time about this. I think eventually they'll move on, but like, I don't think you'll ever see them be like, oh man, like I don't think you're going to see them being publicly, reminiscent of their time at Iowa State, because I think they will pretty much forever probably hate the athletic department and maybe Jamie Pollard. So I don't know. It's a weird situation. It's a difficult situation. It doesn't look good for Iowa State athletics. It doesn't look good for Jamie Pollard. Even if he's truly not to blame in this, if he's truly not to blame, he could have done a much better job at not sounding like he was just shuffling blame to other people and throwing other people under the bus. So that's it. That's all I've got really to say on it right now. It's just a weird situation. But everybody, appreciate you for tuning in. I'm going to wrap it up for this week. I don't really want to talk about basketball anyways. It's just depressing. So appreciate everybody for tuning in and chiming in with their comments this week. I really appreciate it. Hope everybody has a great rest of your week. Enjoy the game on Saturday. We got the Big 12 tournament next week for basketball. Winner down in Big 12 down in Kansas City. They just got down there tonight. So hopefully get a good week out of them, get a good week out of the men. Hopefully a couple of tournament runs. We'll see if we go from there. So probably be back next week. Probably a basketball heavy show next week. Just once, because we'll have a better idea what the tournaments are going to look like and all that too. So thanks for tuning in. Appreciate all your comments, and we'll see you next week here on the Voice of College Football Network. Go Cyclones.